Let's now review the overall layout of dbt Cloud and what you can expect when working in it. So here we are on the home page, and what we'll start with is up on the right, just your profile. And if we were to click on this here, we can see a handful of different options. First is just basic contact info. You can put your name, your email address. Next is credentials, and the credentials here will be broken down by project. So we can see we only have one project, it's analytics, but in theory, you could have many. I've been on projects that have a lot of different projects on here, and you have credentials for each of them. But when we click on here, we can see we have our connections and our what we're calling our development credentials. Remember, there's two on dbt Cloud. We have development and deployment environments here, and this is talking about development, your local development. And this, think of this like the profiles.yaml that we built. Now, if we click edit, we can come in here and we can edit any of this stuff. We can change our password, the authentication method. If you have SSO, you could select that here and it would work for you, and all this stuff. We also have an option for environment variables, and that's something with dbt Cloud that you can set. We'll point that out a little bit later in this lesson, but you have an option here to override them so that you can maybe change something for while you're locally developing compared to your normal production development. Then we have our password. You can set your password here. We have an option for Git tokens here, as well as integration. So we integrated with GitHub, but if you use GitLab, you can manage that here, as well as Slack. So you could trigger Slack notifications directly through dbt Cloud. And I will say some of this stuff is only visible if you're an administrator. So if you're just a regular developer on a project, you may not see some of these things here. Notifications, you can set what kind of notifications for this account that you want, as well as API access. So we'll talk about the API a little bit later, but with dbt Cloud, there's ways to connect to it through the API and do a couple different things. And this is your key right here. Up top here, we can see the different projects. Again, we only have one, but if you had multiple, you could select those here, as well as different accounts. So we only have one account. So you can see how you can build this out. If you wanted to break it up in different ways, you could do that here. Now, going to this hamburger menu here, we can go back to the home page. Now let's talk about environments. So environments, as we mentioned, we have development. Each developer should have their own development environment. That's what you set up when you start. And then we have environment variables. So here we can set these variables. It's very similar to what we did with GitHub Actions, where we could set those environment variables and then call them within our code. We could do that here. And the only qualification here is it has to be prefixed with dbt underscore, and this is how you reference them. But you can very easily just add them. You can add a key, you can add a default, and then you can add a local development value, and that's what you could override in your profiles if you wanted to. Back to environments. Let's create a new one. And again, think of this like profiles.yaml. So remember we had our dev and our prod. This would be the equivalent right now of us creating that prod target. So let's create this and we'll give this a name. We'll call this production. Now this isn't the same as target. It's just called production. What type? Again, we have development and deployment. You'll really only be creating deployment environments here for the most part. So we'll create a deployment, and you can pick a version. We'll keep the latest version, but if you had some requirements, you could go back. Next is custom branch. We only want this environment to ever be associated with the main branch. And we'll see how this comes into play in a little bit when we create a job. Next is connection. It's taking the default connections that we built. In our case, we could change this from analytics dev to analytics. And then the same for deployment credentials. I'll have to put this in again. And then the default schema, we'll put this as public. Now save. And now we've saved this deployment environment. And what you do with environments in dbt Cloud is really, especially for deployment, is really tie jobs to them. And jobs are really different ways to trigger dbt commands on a cadence or manually from dbt Cloud. Think of it like a GitHub action, really, but we're tying it to specific environments. In this case, we've created a production environment. We could see there's no jobs tied to this. We could also see the run history here if there was some, and we can click settings to go back in and adjust anything that we want. Let's go back. Let's create a new job that's tied to this environment. Think of this very similar to the actions. We'll call this daily production run. Environment. So this is where we select the environment, in our case, production, but imagine you had one for test or UAT, dev, whatever, and something you want to run from here. DBT version, we'll keep this the same threads for now target. Now this is where we get to pick the target name. So we created, the difference here is we created the environment, we've created all those connections, but it's not hard coded to always be the same target name. So when we do that flag, it's a little different. But typically what you'll do is kind of align it to whatever you would have done locally. So in my case, I would set the target name prod, even though the name technically of this environment that we made is called production. The target is prod. They're technically two different things, but you have to specify them. Generate docs. It will automatically generate them for you if you want. I won't select that, but it will. It can also do a source freshness check for you. We didn't cover that in this training, but that is an option here. Timeout, you can set a timeout for a running. You can also defer as well to a recent run state, running a manifest. So the manifest.json is essentially all of your compiled code put into a JSON file, and you can use that to figure out what has changed. Remember earlier we mentioned that idea of Slim CI real briefly. It uses the manifest. Again, we didn't quite cover that in this training, but that is something you can do here. Now commands, you can do whatever you want. You can add multiple commands. Notifications can be configured from your profiles. And here you can set up a schedule if you want, very similar to what we did in GitHub Actions. We have webhooks, so you can work on a pull request. Obviously, we covered GitHub Actions. You can see there's a lot of similarities here. They're really offering a lot of these same features all in one place within dbt Cloud. So you can run it on a pull request. You can only do it on a certain branch if you want. And then there's some more information about APIs. I'm going to turn off the schedule just for now to avoid it from running when I'm done with this. And we'll save this. So I'll just call this, instead of daily, production run, and save this. So now we have our production run tied to our production environment. And we can see it's all connected here. So let's go ahead and click run now. When you click run, you can see it kicks it off. It's queued, and we can see it kicked off from the UI and the default branch, default schema. Nothing was changed. And there's just, there's some information here that you can look at. Now, this may take a little bit to kick off initially. You can see it's in queued state. So in the meantime, while that's running, I'm going to hop down to account settings to show you this. And this is very similar to the profile, but we can see here, this is your project level settings. We have our project, the repository that it's tied to. So if you ever needed to adjust something here, you could do that. We have our connection, our default connection here. These are really the project level items for you. More about notifications. You can manage your team here, invite members. Billing, we don't have billing because this is a trial account, but you would set this up here. Some service tokens as well as API information. But really that's all this is here, just pretty standard administrative stuff. Let's go back to run history now. We can see still queued. So we'll give this some time still. Let's move on now to develop. And develop is where you're going to spend most of your time as a developer. So we can see because we imported it before, our project got brought in here. And up here, we can handle all of our Git needs. So we're initially on our main branch. We can check out a branch if we had other ones. So we can see our old branches here. It's pulling from GitHub. We can also create a new branch and do all the stuff we need to do here. And I actually want to focus on the workflow of this in a completely separate lesson. But for now, you can see this is where this is at. This is what it looks like. We have the option to preview queries, compile, all this stuff. But again, we'll come back to that in the next lesson. Let's go back to the run history. I'll keep waiting for this. And once this reloads, we'll pick this back up and just review the results. All right, so coming back to our job, it finally ran and it was successful. We can see it did run for quite a while, but it ran everything. And you get some nice UI here, colors, and we can see some details about it. You can see what it did. It cloned, it got your profile, ran dbt deps, and then did dbt run. And we can see the output here with some good colors of everything that happened. Again, we can go to the logs and see more specifically on what happened if we need to for debugging purposes. Yeah, and this is it. So again, more with the model times, you could see how long something took, what took the longest. So we can see this movie voting took quite a bit of time. And finally, we have our artifacts here. You can see all the compiled runs, and you can click this and it will open up a download link so you could save it locally if you needed to do that. And again, manifest.json is going to be just one huge JSON of all of your project. So you can use that for various automation purposes. So yeah, all this is here. We can look at a run history and add more jobs, add environments, schedule things all through dbt Cloud and get yourself going.